Okay, we're live now.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our meeting this afternoon for Pillar 3, College and Career Readiness Advisory Committee meeting. I am Olivia Pearson, Chair of the committee and current College Readiness Supervisor for Prince George's County Public Schools. I'd like to give us all a chance to do a round of introductions. We've got some additional committee members here today that were not able to join us last time. And so for the next person, I would turn it over to our co-chair, who has already been just so amazing, Dave Harper. Dave, you're still muted.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Harper, I'm from Caroline County, and I work at Chesapeake College, Community College. And my peers are the M4CAO, which is an affinity group of the chief academic officers in the state of Maryland for community colleges.
Awesome, thank you. And I think anyone else, just feel free to join in.
Hi, everyone. Candace Dotson-Reed. I, as you can tell by my background, work at UMBC. I'm the Chief of Staff to the President here, and I'm from Howard County, and I'm really happy to be here this week. Thanks.
Awesome. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Banyas. Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're good.
I'm a former student member of the Howard County Board of Education, and now I am a first year at Duke University. Thrilled to be on the committee with you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Werner, Talbot County. I'm the CTE supervisor, and I also oversee Title IIA grants in our student teaching placements.
Good afternoon, Mike DiGiacomo, Executive Director for the Governor's Workforce Development Board and CTE Committee.
Hi, Allie Carter, Program Manager for the CTE Committee from the Department of Labor.
Rachel Amstutz, I'm the Director of Operations and Policy at the AIB.
I'm Graham Hardig, and I'm a Management Associate here at the AIB.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see all of you again today. And we have, I want to say, just one committee member who is not able to make it today, and that's Kirkland. He may be a bit late, so hopefully he'll be able to join when he gets a chance. A few updates. From our last meeting, we have been able to receive some updates from the AIB with the new comprehensive draft plan. There is a feedback form and a public hearing on November 10th to discuss the plan, and folks can submit written testimony for the plan, traditionally for the public. For us, since we do have this committee, we will be working a little more strategically on our feedback. And so as you'll see today, we have decided to break up Pillar 3 into the sub areas, and each one of our meetings are going to focus on a particular sub area. It also may still be good to attend, of course, like the November 10th meeting, public hearing, so that we can also hear additional feedback from all of our constituent groups regarding our specific pillar. We had some outstanding questions our last meeting regarding the CCR study. And so you'll see that MSDE has published a roadmap to college and career readiness that is in alignment with our pillar. In there, there is, and in the legislation, there's reference to an outside group that will perform a study on college and career readiness and do a research study. And so there were questions about where we are in that timeline for this study results to be released. And what we were able to find is that the MSDE is working through the RFP process as it relates to folks bidding on the study. And we were also able to get a copy of the actual RFP. So if you are wondering what the RFP kind of looked like, it's linked here, as well as there is a link on the MSDE site as to the actual RFP if you had any questions about that. I'm going to pause just a moment. Any questions before we dig into 3.1?
Thanks, Olivia. No questions from me.
Olivia, I can give a quick update just with the CCR study. We talked with MSDE yesterday. They are waiting for it to get put on the schedule at the Board of Public Works. So it's moving along through the process, but it's a process.
And so, Rachel, I actually do have a question about that. Is the deliverable timeline the same?
As what was written in law, is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Nothing has changed on that. Yep.
So I see that the external contractor reports the results of the study on September 1st of 2023. That's what you referred to? Right.
Mm-hmm.
To the governor, the General Assembly, and to the AIB.
Okay, I'm so anxious to see that. And as we dig into 3.1, what we see is a lot of the items in 3.1 refer back to the study. And so if there are no other questions, I think we can dig into 3.1. It would be great if there was a way to show the graphic as we're discussing it. Are we able to do that?
We can give you rights to share your screen. Would that work? Or anybody? Does somebody have it up and want to share?
I have it up. I can share.
Okay. Let me see. Graham, would you be able to make Dave a co-host?
Yep, you should be good now.
Thank you.
Can you see that?
Absolutely, we can see that. And so, Dave, are you able to go to the top? Perfect. Thank you. And so just to give some context, in some of our previous meetings, we discussed that in the future, we want to be able to review and write our comments directly on just a document to guide our discussion for when we come back together. But because this document was released within the last week, we weren't able to stand that up and have time to do that for this meeting. And so we'll discuss 3.1 during this meeting today. But as we set our progression for our next meetings, we absolutely will have time to focus and review the next area so that we've had some of that digested before we come to the meeting. All right, everybody ready to jump in?
Yes, thanks, Olivia.
We're good.
May I begin with a quick question, just from my understanding? So I'm thinking about the deliverables and the milestones, and we've talked about September 2023, September 1st, the external contractor shall report the results of the empirical study. And just asking because what we see is in fiscal year 24, MSBE shall adopt an updated CCR standard. Just to say that if the results are reported in September 2023, that is fiscal year 24. And so does that mean that by the end of that fiscal year, there will be a decision to adopt? That's the question. What about digestion time, right? Like if it lands on September 2023, the school year has already begun at that point.
That is a fabulous question. I am going to take that one back and bring clarification for the team. I don't want to guess at that answer.
I
just-
also want, I'm
Go.
sorry. I also wanted to follow up with Dave's question of, we're going to get these results and it'll be after, the FY24 school year begins. But I guess I'm a little unclear of what this study is going to show us, and meaning like what kind of data should we anticipate? Is this study, are they looking at our students' performance already? Are they, it looks like they're also going to be surveying, post-secondary education as well. I guess I'm just looking for a little clarity of what this study is going to show us, the types of information it's going to show us. I know we don't know exactly what the results will be, obviously, but I see like empirical study throughout the pillar 3. I'm just a little unclear of like what we can expect from that.
My thinking is probably the best place to dig in, because that's going to be a pretty comprehensive answer, actually, would be that RPF that's linked into the agenda, that is telling exactly what the state is looking for in the company that will do the study. But essentially, I mean, the simple answer, I think we kind of all know that we're looking to see if there is alignment and where, if not, the gaps are between current standards and what would make students successful in their first years of college. As part of it, there are actually 2 studies being done, but I think the RFP is really going to spell it out the best.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on all of that, to follow up with Dave's question, I know in our school district, we start enrolling for fiscal year 24 in April of 23. So although the results will come, whatever the results of this study will be, in April, we're already enrolling students. And so we're already using another, let's say, benchmark to enroll students for dual enrollment beginning at that time. And Robin, to your point, in the RFP, pages 4 and 5, it talks about some of the areas that are going to be the focus of the study. It talks about like the alignment between college prep ready standards and the content of credit-bearing courses, remedial courses, and for project goal number 2, it talks about an analysis exploring the relationship between additional potential standards or indicators of student readiness, and other than those initially set by MSDE, and actual student readiness to succeed in an entry-level credit-bearing course and or post-secondary training at the community college. And to me, I think that gets to part of what we were talking about during our last meeting of multiple measures and not just having one measure of readiness as it relates to CCR.
And that, am I right to be encouraged by that fiscal year 24 language that MSBE shall adopt cut scores on assessments, plural, needed to determine CCR standard? So if they adopt a new CCR standard and that includes new cut scores on assessments, plural, that suggests to me there's multiple assessments that could determine CCR, which perhaps there's some room there for the alternative assessments or the multiple assessments and multiple measures we've discussed.
I'm hopeful as well, is all I can say. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm hopeful.
Well, and that's why, I mean, the report goes to MSDE. So if we could have an audience with MSDE, if we could have an audience with the CTE committee, you know, these are examples of, you know, ways we could provide feedback. Hopefully that'd be constructive, and the data are clear and consistent that no single assessment can accurately determine readiness. So if assessments plural are possible, then that's hopeful.
Well, the other thing I wanted to add to that, because I'm looking through the RFP and I'm seeing like some of what they're using, and that's the state standardized scores in algebra and English, SAT scores, etc. The issue with that is our data is really not very accurate because of the early fall testing. It's not really a true indicator of student success. The latest data that we have was when students took those assessments when they were starting school last year, and they had a gap from the year before, and in a non-traditional classroom setting of students doing partially virtual school. And we saw across the board that, you know, our data was way off with that. And I'm not sure the scores, obviously we will have more scores to add to that this year, but there's a delay in those scores. And I'm not sure if they will have the spring testing scores available to present for the study if the study is coming out in September, because we're still waiting to get last spring's scores. So I'm afraid that like some of the most recent data is really not going to be super accurate. And I guess that's not something that any of us can do anything about. But it's just another point of the timing with this process. And to Dave's point about standard setting, that takes a lot of time. And if we have to develop additional assessments, that's even more time. I mean, you need expert review teams for that, and standard setting meetings, and there's just a lot that goes to that. So I don't know how we do that mid-year, you know, when we get those results, because it's going to take September 1st that it's presented. It's going to take time to unpack that study as well. So just as I'm looking through this, just something else I wanted to add to the discussion, that the timing of it could definitely be a concern.
I agree. And I'm just thinking in one of the areas in the RFP and I think in the actual blueprint legislation, it speaks of the bias that's in each assessment potentially. And I'm still holding out that hope that Dave spoke of, that because there is inherent bias in a lot of these assessments, and we're not having time for potentially new assessments, I'm hopeful that that means that there will be multiple measures. It wouldn't just be that we're waiting on one assessment. It could be multiple assessments. I'm reading, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but I'm reading so much into that language that it's acknowledged, that there is bias in assessments, and how are we going to, narrow down these best assessments.
I think the spirit of the law seemed to be to provide opportunity, right? To provide an opportunity for two things: for students to demonstrate their readiness for college or career paths, but also an opportunity for them to get the remediation they need individualized. So I think that's the spirit of it. And if and that it consistent with that spirit is the sort of multiple or alternative measures, the kind of thing that we've seen and used in our MOUs for college and career readiness, or for college readiness, we've called it in the past. The MOUs between the superintendents and the community college CAOs. Now, one of the things I see here is if MSBE views the data, the empirical data study results in September, and then adopts the standard in fiscal year 24. So at some point throughout that year, perhaps implementation is possible in fiscal year 25 through 27, when they're talking about updating standards, frameworks, and the system to align with the new CCR standard. So there's a progression there. You view the results, you adopt a new standard, and then you update curriculum frameworks and the system, the instructional system, to align with that. So hopefully there's some flexibility, to implement it right, so it opens opportunity for students and provides the remediation planning that would be needed.
And when we take a look at 3.1.2b, it does speak to soliciting feedback from AIB, LEAs, and community colleges as it relates to these standards. So that also, it's hopeful to me in that way that there's hopefully going to be time. So I know they're working through this RFP process, but there should be time built in to actually get feedback as part of as part of this process prior to the report that comes out on September 1st.
Can I ask just a quick question about that? Because I see reference often, the community colleges, our wonderful community colleges. Is there some engagement that can be suggested about how we interact with the 4 years?
I think that's a great question. I think that needs to be maybe added to the list of questions that we take back, because it's referenced often about community colleges. And I think there is room to discuss the 4 years. Also, I know there is part of the blueprint that discusses 4 years and students being able to participate either in community college or a 4-year institution.
I think it's a good question, a great point, and we always welcome partnership. It's a good idea. I think one of the reasons that perhaps the legislation kind of foresees a collaboration with community colleges is because of the traditional role community colleges have played with dual enrollment, and also because as open door institutions for years, they have a lot of expertise in terms of assessing college readiness. And also they provide those career programs that are the other half. So part of their sort of unique and complementary mission in the state is as open door institutions, as career focused workforce institutions, and as institutions that by virtue of being open door also are adept at evaluating and assessing college readiness. Because that's why they have to provide, those supports for students who are not. We have whole departments dedicated to providing supports to students who are not college ready.
Sure, absolutely. Totally makes sense to me. I just think we're missing that piece when we're talking broadly about college ready.
The other thing I wanted to add, I'm looking on page 7 of this, and it just kind of gives the overview of the quantitative study should answer the following questions. I don't see much that is related to the career side of this for CTE. A lot of it is, are we predicting the standards and measurement and that predicts if a student would be ready for entry-level credit-bearing coursework or post-education training. There's only a small portion that's dedicated to CTE and careers. And then looking down below in the next section, where I was reading about the different scores that are collected, like the MCAP scores and SAT, et cetera. The only thing that's dedicated to CTE is concentrator status. So, and that's quotations. It's something that we had used for CTE to look at our enrollment and how many students are staying in a program. And my concern is if that's the only data that's collected, this seems very heavy on the post-secondary education side of this. And my biggest concern with the results of this study and with CCR, and I think we talked about this in our last meeting, we do not want CCR to be a gatekeeper for students to get into programs that will actually help better engage them to become CCR, right? We talked about the example of a student who may be struggling in math, but then they go do a carpentry program and they learn those math skills in another way and become more successful. I'm concerned that if in this RFP, if they're not really focusing on what employers are saying that they need in some of these specific areas, that if it's very heavy to the college side of this, that this CCR status is going to be defined more off of a student taking entry-level credit-bearing courses and not so much a student going directly into the workforce. And I'm concerned because I'm thinking of the programs right now off the top of my head that could be hurt by that. And I don't really understand how the concentrator status is really going to give us a lot of meaningful information, because that's just telling you how many classes they've taken. It doesn't really tell you how successful they've been. It's not telling you if they've earned industry credentials or not. It's very super, surface level. So I don't know if how much can be changed in this this plan and I do need to read through some more of that, but just looking at that snapshot of it, my CTE lens is a little concerned that it's going to be very much focused on the student going directly into college, whether that's community college or a 4-year, and we might be missing a population of students.
I do see in here that it has recommended but not limited to. And so I'm wondering if that's a place where, as they're soliciting feedback, we can give recommendations of additional areas to potentially take a look at. What do you think?
What I'm thinking too, and Mike, I think where the CTE committee comes in, I mean, to me, they would be the first place to go to, because you have representatives in different workforce and across the state. Could they be surveyed for that? Could they be surveyed of what are some other skills or criteria that we could use that could say that a student would demonstrate the potential of being successful going into a CTE program, regardless of what some of the other, MCAP scores or be, to provide that other or that additional that Olivia is referencing. I don't know if there's been talk of that, but to me, that could be a place for the CTE committee.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the things that we will add is, getting the employer input to what that really looks like, and then make those recommendations within the CTE plan that's due. about what's the requirement actually for those folks as well.
If I may speak a little bit about the this RFP, I'm curious in 3.1.4C, it says MSBE shall adopt cut scores on assessments for students. I'm really interested in learning more about how we actually define college and career success, what metrics tell us that a student is ready, and how that actually presents itself in college. I am curious to know specifically, though, how the AIB has determined that their objective is already to cut scores, rather than objectively determining which way maybe the line needs to be, or how that line needs to be shifted. Has there been preliminary research that has found that that line is too high, and is that what is inspiring this further study?
Quick note that the cut score will establish a threshold above which presumably college and career ready, below which needs remediation. So it could go in either direction as a result of a study. And I think the study is looking for an instrumentation, what assessments, plural, and then making recommendations on cut scores, I think comes after that, after the study results. The Board of Education shall adopt a new CCR standard and new cut scores. So it doesn't necessarily mean that score thresholds will be cut, just that there'll be a threshold, a cut line, a line that cuts between ready and not ready. One interesting corollary, like I think it comes out of your question too, is college and career ready have been sandwiched into one term, college and career ready. But to sort of Robin's point, there might be different populations we're talking about who have their eyes set on the post-secondary trajectory and who may have their eyes set on the workforce. And so it's not necessarily the same assessment. It's not the same evaluation. It's not the same population. So it's not the same cut score.
That makes sense. Interesting. Thank you.
So if I'm really understanding the whole intentionality with this, it's that we are having someone from the outside look at everything that we have done historically in Maryland and what we have used to say that someone is a student is CCR or close to being CCR, and the different data that we use to determine that, and taking all the information of all the different things that we do and reviewing it, and really from the outside perspective, what's working and what's not working, and providing MSCE recommendations. Is that essentially like what we're getting from this? Is here's some research and data on what other schools or countries or whoever states are doing, and this could be beneficial in Maryland because of X, Y, and Z. Like, to me, it sounds like there's someone from the outside who's able to kind of take a bigger, like, global look at everything that we do, because sometimes I think when we're so isolated into our own distinct departments, when we're working in isolation, we don't always see how it all fits together. And I think that's kind of the whole point of this, that it's able to see how all the different pieces work together so that we're making sure students are prepared before they leave.
And they may find solutions or ideas that haven't been considered here, which is great. I hope that in implementation, there's a healthy integration of best practices from elsewhere and, practical acknowledgement of what has been learned here. I think you probably need both for success.
Yeah, although there's some concern with the timeline, I think the end result, however, we get there, if there has to be adjustment, is good, because it's making us take a look into what we've been doing. And sometimes we get in the habit of just doing what we've been doing. And that's not until someone takes a step back and looks at it and evaluates it to see what's working. I mean, I'm excited to see what is possible. And if we have other opportunities right now beyond of what we're currently saying is CCR, it could really open some doors for students, and change some other things that we're doing and make students more successful. So I think it's great that this is happening. It might be a little bumpy road to get there because it's going to take a lot of coordination, I think, between lots of different groups. But I think in the end, I am really excited to see what comes of this next year.
I think one other piece to keep in mind here is that with the blueprint, we're now looking at a determinant in 10th grade, whereas all of our prior markers have been later in high school. So I think that that's going to be very interesting to see, looking back historically in Maryland student performances to 10th grade, which students were most successful in college, that we're changing the entire marker of where we're looking at. So they're able to pull that data more historically and change that. So it may not even be a full test, like David said, it might be several, or it might be a course or components of a course. Like it may not be one measure like it's been in the past.
And am I understanding it correctly that that study starts and ends in fiscal year 23? Is that right?
So the end date would technically probably cross into 24 if we're going into September when it's due back. Is that what you mean? Like the
Yes,
study is
okay.
due back in September of 23, which I think July would turn us over to the 24 fiscal year.
24. Okay. Just trying to understand how it all plays together.
And Candace, I'm just now seeing 3.1.6. I'd seen it before, but the Board of Ed will consult with the Higher Education Commission, which is an event for all four-year schools, right? That's all four-year schools in Maryland. The Workforce Development Board and the CTE Committee, and then the Association of Community Colleges and the Accountability Implementation Board. So we're meant to collaborate. Like we see good information, we're meant to collaborate on making it work.
Thank you.
If I may ask another question. So we're creating this metric, this idea of whether a student falls as college or career, however we subdivide that, readiness. Once a student falls either that they are ready or not, and that distinction is made, how does that directly impact a student and at what point in their high school career?
I love that question, and I can probably take a first stab at it. The idea would be that by 10th grade, we're going to know yes or no, they are or they aren't. And potentially, I think maybe Robin mentioned it earlier, maybe they are in math, but not in language arts or something like that. So we've got this data on the student. What the blueprint requires is different from before. We now need to look at each student individually and determine what they need to be successful if they aren't by that measure in 10th grade, looking like they're on track to be college and career ready. So that the high schools need to have a different way of helping address the needs that each student is presenting. So, in pillar 2, we're looking at giving teachers more time to be able to work in small groups with students, or even maybe one-on-one, that those students need to have a plan, that it's not just like, we'll go take Algebra 1 again and go take it again and go take it again. It's really, we need to help support the student in these specific areas that they need support.
And is that plan, once it's determined, is that something that has to be reported to some higher entity, sort of like how IEPs have to be tightly regulated in some way?
That's another great question. Currently, there's a 9th grade tracker that has now been put in place. I'm not aware of what will happen down the road with that, if that document stays in place, or if it's added on to. That's a great question to bring back to the team to add in your feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Something else that's interesting to me is when we take a look at 3.1.3, that the new benchmark is coming out in September 1, but the very next year it says that MSDE is going to update the instructional system to align with the new CCR standard. And so that's like, you know, if we're a big cruise ship, right? It's like we have to navigate, you know, you've got this year to navigate all aspects of the instructional system to align and support this new CCR standard. And so I think that is, it's great that it's very intentional, that we know, you know, it's going to have to happen. But, you know, to Robin's point, bumps in the road. I mean, I see that as, you know, a lot of potential bumps.
Well, and with that, I think there's going to be some concern there. That's time and money, right? Because it takes time to make curriculum adjustments. Because we can't, doing that mid-year really isn't possible. And it takes money because you have some districts that have already adopted curriculums that they have contracts with that may need to be adjusted. A lot of times in smaller districts, we tend to write some of our own curriculum, and we pay our teachers stipends to do that. And that's typically done like over the summer. It takes a lot of time to do that. So I'm just curious too of where the money comes from for that. Because if the study is saying that we need to make some major adjustments, like in the way that we teach math, for example, and I just picked that because I do know from our early fall data across the state that there was, you know, our students really struggled on that early fall MCAP assessment across the board in almost every grade area. So if we're given some information on to make adjustments, how do we do that, both with time and money that's needed?
Going off on
So-
that idea with the,
Oh,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I wanted to ask, so it talks about in 3.1.3a, these curriculum resources, and then in 3.1.3b, it says that MSBE shall submit curriculum resources and standards as two separate entities to MSBE for adoption. So when we're speaking about these syllabi and course lessons and stuff like that, are these mandates or are they purely offered resources? So when if you raised the point of having to change potentially the way that things are being taught mid-year, is it because it would have been mandated or that suddenly teachers would want to switch? Is that the presupposition of the question?
So I'm partially thinking like when MSDE has to adopt that any new standard, that becomes the standard that governs what teachers teach. They do not adopt standard changes like mid-year. The MSDE is also going to be required to create their own curriculum that would become the state curriculum. That is optional for schools to use, and they can use pieces of it, they can use all of it. But when the expert review teams start visiting schools and these are all non-colleges, when they're visiting the K-12s, if they determine that the curriculum is not sufficient and is part of the problem that's holding students back from achieving, one of the recommendations of an expert review team can mandate that a school adopt the state curriculum. So the state still has to write that curriculum once the study is done, but we do not, as a state, mandate its use unless a school is not achieving, and then the expert review team would make that recommendation.
And that is done on an individual school by school basis?
Yes, so the expert review teams will be visiting us a percentage of schools each year over the next 10 years. And there will be priority given to schools that are chronically not meeting the measures and students are struggling to be successful. all schools will get at least one visit in the next 10 years, but each school's recommendations, every school is going to get some recommendations to help improve. Each school's recommendations will be completely customized to that school based on what was observed, which and includes data that they've been given ahead of time, focus groups, interviews, classroom visits on site during the expert review team. And then yes, one option would be adopting the new state curriculum, or maybe components. Maybe it's math that's been a struggle, so they would need to adopt the new math.
Wonderful. And that is entirely independent of the RFP?
The only connection would be that the RFP is going to give information to MSDE about the curriculum. So it's
okay,
mostly independent, but it will inform the development of the new state curriculum.
Certainly. Thank you.
And then if that were to happen, if say there was a school like you mentioned is consistently struggling and the review team recommended adopting that curriculum, would there be support from MSDE on implementation, or is it just here's where we think you should go, you need to adopt this curriculum? I mean, would they provide any support with teachers like over the summer or PD days to help facilitate that rollover?
So I don't know that I've heard that level yet. You know, we've kind of got our heads into writing the plan right now, but the expert review team process is being developed simultaneously. So I don't think that they would be left hanging. I think that they would have supports, but they will get, you know, a pretty extensive feedback report, and it won't just say like adopt the curriculum. I think it would come, but we should definitely maybe clarify that and make sure of it. But that process, MSDE has submitted a first draft of the expert review team process. They're continuing to pilot it, and then they're going to refine some of their rubrics and criteria, and then also develop the feedback form. But I think that you're spot on to suggest that you can't just adopt something and you're fixed, you know, that it would take time to learn a new curriculum and to understand the intent of the curriculum or the instructional moves and all of that.
So for our feedback, I'm trying to capture some of these in our shared notes. And I just want to make sure I catch this. So edit and correct me, please, here. What I think I'm hearing is that if the empirical study results are presented in September and then adopted in fiscal year 24, that we adopted can't mean implemented, because that would mean a mid-year shift, and that would mean no time for unpacking the results of the study in any kind of meaningful way. So then presented in September 23, adopted in fiscal year 24, meaning really reviewed as much as possible and considered like the strategy for implementation. And then fiscal year 25 through 27, that's really your implementation timeline. But I guess we're going off of the guidance that we have, is what I'm hearing, that there needs to be more granular specifics about that, or at least flexibility for LEAs. Talk to me about how you want to frame this in our feedback.
Now, I hear what you're saying, Dave. I just don't know how to help you. Right.
Yeah. Gotcha.
I understand. I understand what you mean. I guess because in the graphic, you know, it's when we don't have like specific timelines, and when we say things like adopt, like to what level, you know, like you said, because it will be something that we get results mid-year. So I guess that you had mentioned, like, if there could be more specific and granular steps added to that. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I don't know if anyone does. It's just very hard to answer that when we don't know exactly what we'll get back, you know.
And not that, I mean, that's where you have the involvement and the engagement, right, with the school system, is that they're providing the granular in their plans, right? But it just I think the question we've fumbled over is, what does adopt mean for fiscal year 24? So specifically, you know, what does that mean? And I think what we're coming down to in our recommendation is we hope it means to make a plan.
Right.
For later implementation. Because if adopt meant to do it right then, you wouldn't really have time.
No, that would be impossible. Or if it was that, it wouldn't be done successfully. I think you just hit it right there, which is, can there be more? Can there be some more specific language around that adopt? Can something be added to say that the LEAs are coming up with plans to adopt or plans to implement? Like, can that be a little bit more specific of a phrase there? Because I think that is doable to say that you're going to receive this information in September, and then we're going to work through this. Because you have this combination of all these different entities coming in and basically giving us information between the expert review teams and this empirical study, that between that information, because we're going to have information that's coming as a whole from MSTE of saying this is what a CCR student looks like, and this is what they need to be supported. But then the expert review teams are also going to be able to give some more specific feedback of where schools are needing to adopt or needing to do. So maybe combining that information in a plan, to me, would be adopting.
I think I got it. Thanks.
Okay.
And I think that's good. I think I was struggling with the timeline in general.
Yeah.
And this is helpful. And I think us noting that is important. Thank you for calling that out.
I think this is really fabulous feedback to bring back to the staff and members, that, expanding on this. And then even earlier, Robin, you talked about just some of the details involved in the work of what happens after each of these things happens, in the schoolhouse or at the district level, that even just being able to list some considerations, like consider the need for rewriting, course syllabi or curriculum, and or vetting new textbooks, that's a process that's in most districts a very lengthy process.
Right. And we have policies around that too.
Absolutely.
So for like our adoption policy, I mean, we have to have, it takes months because we have to bring it before the board, and then we have to have it for public review for so many days, usually 30 days, and every school system would have their own policy with that. So yeah, that's another point.
That's a really great point, that maybe if this committee could kind of kick those things around and list some considerations of that, adds to the timeline for the school district, at that level, or at the, even some schools have individual courses that are unique to them, the listing out those kinds of things would be helpful.
I think the other main, apologize, go.
No, I was just going to add on that it absolutely is a lengthy process for adopting curriculum and textbook and curriculum writing. And although we are a larger district, a lot of our curriculum is written by teachers as well. And there's a finite time. There's only so much time in the summer that we have to do that. And I was just thinking, the good thing about Blueprint is it's really facilitating this collaboration with the colleges, the workforce development boards, LEAs, but at the same time, some of that's going to have to happen in each of these smaller pockets. And so that also takes time. And so when you're thinking about how we get these recommendations and how is that going to be addressed by each LEA, there are several courses and several ways that all of that, I'm thinking, would need to be done at the different levels.
And just a quick note that another major point I've underlined for us is to make sure there's equal support given to, and emphasis on the CTE pathways, because I think that's also in the spirit of the legislation. And in addition to us looking differently at evaluating students sooner to see if they're on trajectory for success, so we can put in necessary support sooner as need be, but also giving them that real divided pathway so that they can take a CTE workforce pathway, they can take a post-secondary pathway if that's the best thing for them. Don't want the post-secondary to be overwhelmed by the CTE, because the spirit of the legislation seems to be really intentional about that.
I'm switching gears a little bit, but I just wanted to make a point of how important 3.1.5 is to all of this. A communication strategy and plan is super important. I know it's noted here, but I just think there should be some real thought as to how that will happen, because I do think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I'm glad you drew attention to that. I wonder, even the timeline consideration. I know we've got the timeline over to the right on the chart there, but it does seem like the earlier and the more thorough the communication is, the more we can answer questions for people. Because I think most schools are kind of in that phase where they're asking some of the same questions. Robin, I think you're speaking on behalf of many districts and representing and raising those concerns. So that communication would help alleviate some of that.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about with this is, we mentioned that everyone has some of their own policies in the way that they do things, and that could have different implications for different districts. I think an example of of that right now is us switching from end of course assessments in two of our areas. So in science and social studies in high school, we're moving towards that exam being an end of course assessment versus taking a test with a cut score for graduation requirement. That has been a 2-year process, if not more. That has taken a lot of time to adopt, just that one change for that to happen across all LEAs. And one thing, the reason I'm bringing this up is, this is going to be the first year that we're looking towards moving to implementation. And part of the reason why that's taken a lot of time is because of COVID, obviously. But we had to send many surveys to MSCE about a lot of our information of what we do. So we had to send, what is our policy? What is our grading scale? How do we handle these different things with grading? When would you need to have the grades, the scores back from those tests to be able to then use that information to put a grade in? I mean, they're still, to my knowledge, still surveying us on some of that information. So I guess my point being with all of this is, if this, with this RFP and all of this study, and if it's going to move us to making systemic changes in Maryland, along the way, I think a recommendation to the AIB and MSCE is that we're probably going to need to consistently survey LEAs, even if it's small surveys on things that they do, so we know the bigger impact on what that is. So something that's going to impact the way that we grade or adopt curriculum or whatever it is. I think that if we survey along and that way we can see how this is going to have an impact, like, oh, this only affects one district, or this is going to affect everyone. That can also adjust some of the recommendations that are made along the way, so that it's going to be a bumpy road, but maybe it won't be as bumpy of a road if we know what everyone does, because there are some things that we probably all have that are very similar, but then there are some things that might be really unique, and it might be helpful to have that information. So I don't know the best way to do that. I'm just thinking that as we've made change already in some of these areas before, this study came to be, and before Blueprint, and this is one thing that needed to happen. And I think in some areas, that is what's caused some of the delay in implementing that, because MSCE found out along the way that, oh, this is going to be a little bit of a heavier lift than we thought, because it's not as easy. There are some districts that have policies with this. You have to change your program of study, and everyone has different timelines and when they do that and when their board approves those things. So I'm getting into the weeds with that, but I guess my whole point is surveying the LEAs along the way, I think, will help everybody avoid a lot of heartache.
I have another point I'd like to address. So we're establishing these different tracks. Let's simplify it for a second. If we have a couple of exams in high school, and let's say we're looking specifically at the track of students going to, say, four-year colleges. There are two different metrics that need to be paired. One is the scores on those high school assessments or other metrics that we're using to determine that readiness. And then we have the metric of success once that student reaches that university. And in the RFP document, he lists those two categories under E and F on page 7 and 8. Is this RFP asking whoever's doing this research to peg some value for success and then solve to determine where the line is for the readiness number? Because those are two different things. So if there is a difference, a variance in opinion between MSDE, the AIB, and this researcher on where the line is for success, then that's going to cause a change alongside with it of the metric for readiness. And if that is so variable, then do we start with success and then work back and solve for readiness, or do we start with readiness and figure out where the line is for success? I hope I'm articulating myself.
So let me make sure I have it right, because as you were talking, Peter, I was going into the RFP reading, and so I just want to make sure that I'm processing kind of your feedback. And so you're talking about the difference between readiness based on assessment and then the actual success in the particular area.
Yes, since neither of those is a clearly drawn line at this moment, since we're up to interpretation of both of those. Yeah, my question is, which one are we setting first? How is that being set? And is there going to be a moment where stakeholders come to a consensus about one of those metrics before we go and tie the second one to the first?
So I think that's a good question. And the way I understand it, and I'm gonna also would love to hear everyone else on the committee, is that these are almost happening simultaneously. When I look at the success, let's say in college, it's kind of honing in on credit being like successful completion. So if students are taking a college class and they receive credit for it, it is successful. But we all know that if you are in college in a major, credit doesn't always equal success. And so you can receive credit by getting a D, but that D is not going to allow you to progress in your major.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Yeah, so there are a lot of criteria that individually we can say, yeah, this is success or this isn't. But then when we're combining those, they have A through I, all those different factors. Do they all have to be met? Do some of them have to be met? Which amounts? And is there a way for us to get stakeholder agreement on that before we progress and figure out what the criteria for readiness are to project that success?
Yeah, I love that, because let's say in like B, C, and D, it talks about credit, right? But then G speaks to persistence and completion, which is different in that you can receive credit, but your persistence and completion could be impacted by that gray area, I'll call it. So I'm going to throw it to anyone else who wants to provide some feedback to that as well.
No, I agree. I think this is really dependent. It's could be so, there's so many variables that are possible. And it could be dependent on the requirements of that student's pathway that they're taking. I mean, they could because different programs might have different requirements. Different programs have different requirements for even being entering into.
I want to cut you off, Robin. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Good.
I think it's iterative. I think that we'll be constantly thinking about these things from our different spheres forever. But I think that legislation is trying to give people permission to think differently about when readiness is evaluated in the high school experience, what it means to be ready. It's trying to give students permission to think differently about whether they're going to college or straight to workforce. It's trying to get the Workforce Investment Board to think differently about how it collaborates with the school system. It's trying to get CTE programs to think differently about how much input they get from businesses. So I think this whole effort is a giant invitation for us to think a little differently and try new things. I know that's a super vague answer, but like we'll never like arrive at the perfect recipe. Yeah. I just think it's supposed to push us off of status quo, and to enhance the voice of business and to increase the amount of collaboration between colleges and high schools, all to get students to complete sooner and also to move into CTE at a higher rate than they have previously, because Maryland's economy needs more tradesmen. So I think this whole framework, like when I get into sometimes you can't help but get into the deep weeds or you can't get anything done. But sometimes when you're in the middle of the deep weeds, you got to pull back and think, okay, why are we doing this anyway? So anyway.
I love that. And that really brings us, I think, to nearing the end of this part of the discussion on 3.1. When we take a look at 3.1.6 about this coordination and collaboration, it's speaking to the state level, but we all know, to Dave's point and everyone else, it's got to come down to our districts and our schools. So the same collaboration that's happening at the state level has to happen at every level. It's every level has got to address this in the same way. And it's got to be a collaboration and coordination amongst all of these stakeholders. Okay, anything else we want to add? I want to be respectful of time, and we have about 15 minutes left of this meeting. And so I want to be able to just discuss our future meeting cadence, as well as specific guests, and then a short debrief as to how we can improve our meetings in the future. Anything else anyone wants to add about 3.1?
I think our goal is to provide chunks of feedback, hopefully in an understandable form for the November 10th, or even before the November 10th invitation of feedback for the comprehensive draft plan. Am I right?
Well, I think that we may have more time. November 10th to provide comprehensive feedback on everything by November 10th. I think that November 10th may be, and this is my interpretation, for the overarching constituent groups to do so, but because we have a focused committee, we may have a little more time to provide some feedback before everything is adopted in December.
Thanks.
So our next meeting, we're going to focus on 3.2 And 3.2 is, it's got a lot. And so, my question, I think, to the group is, what is our meeting progression? And so once we get what we would like our meeting progression to be, I will send a doodle poll out to everyone just to see which dates fit best on your calendar. But it is November 2nd currently. And so my question is, are we planning for this body to meet monthly, every 2 months, or every 3 months?
What do we have? Can we get our work done if we even, wouldn't it have to be more often than once a month? Or am I mistaken about that?
You may not be. It may be more than that. I think it would be great to know, and maybe we can follow up with Rachel to see when specifically they would like our feedback to be, so that it could be included
And we probably
by the
would
time December comes.
we'd probably meet more frequently at first, right? And but then as time goes by, like it's, you know, we could probably meet twice. And please correct me here, right? Like totally, but we could probably meet more than once a month at first, and while we get this initial feedback on the comprehensive draft plan together, and kind of say what we are hearing from our constituent groups, and make sure we get a good, concise feedback provided to AIB and so forth. But then after that, for the duration of our appointments, it would probably stretch out to more like monthly. But please,
yeah.
others, let me know what you think.
No, I was thinking the same thing, Dave, because, you know, we've only really dug into 3.1. So I'm looking at my calendar and doing some math and looking at holidays and all that other good stuff of how can we get through the other pieces.
I wanted to hop in really quickly too, because I know Rachel had to step away to be with her parents for a moment. But I do think, you know, I don't think there's a necessarily deadline, particularly for advisory committee members and boards submitting feedback. But I do think generally the earlier it could be received by AIB members, the better. And I know we've set a deadline for receiving formal written feedback from the public for just the 12th of this month, which isn't that far off from now. And I do think, you know, you guys can submit feedback anytime you want to the board members. And you can also individually submit written feedback just as individuals to the AIB, all of which is greatly appreciated. But just thinking about the timeline of the finalization of the plan, if it's due December 1st, you know, they're probably gonna, I'm sure they'd appreciate some feedback from you guys around the middle of the month or something, if that were possible. But let me speak with other members of the staff and the board, and hopefully I can get you guys some more specific information about what would be the most useful time frame. And I know there hasn't been a ton of time since the draft plan's been out, but thank you for the work that you have been doing already.
Absolutely, because I'm looking at 3.4 and I feel like that's 2 meetings in itself.
We need to have a
So-
7-hour meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then that's at least a weekly meeting, because 3.4 is, I mean, they're all significant, but I just see a lot of questions, at least from my lens, as it relates to 3.4. So, oh, Rachel is back with us.
Do we have to announce our meetings 2 weeks in advance? In other words, are we right now, or is it 1 week in advance so that we could have a meeting next week?
We really do try for 2 weeks, but if next week you would like to get one in, I can see if we can get permission to do that.
If we want to, by protocol, it would be the week of November 14th that we could next meet. And it would be, and what we would want to do is get through all feedback to try to provide mid-month input to the AIB board. Because what they're saying is if the plan is really due in December 1st, then it's going to be mid-month if we want our feedback to be most useful to them, that we get it to them. So I guess the question is, do we meet once the week of the 14th or twice, I guess? I think we probably need 2 meetings. So is that next week and the 14th, or is it 2 on the week of the 14th?
So, can I make a suggestion? Can we meet the same time on the 9th and the 16th? So it's same time, same day. And then I don't know what everyone's schedule is the week of the 21st, but which is our holiday week. But I'm thinking that Monday and then like the week after that Monday or Tuesday to finalize everything. I know that's meeting every week, but I just want to throw out, to me, I don't have the capacity to meet more than once a week right now, but I could do once a week until the end of this month.
I think it's important. I'm willing to clear my schedule, whatever we need to do to make sure that we give as much time for this. I agree with what everyone said about in order for our information to be useful to the AIB, I feel like we need to give them time to look at our feedback. So I can make that work.
I can also make it work. I might be off camera because it's the day after election day, but but I will definitely make that work. Can you just say that one more time just so I can put it on the calendar? Or is somebody going to send the invites out, or?
There will be invites sent out, but right now we have the 9th and the 16th from 12 to 1:30.
Okay.
And then the 21st and the 28th. I could do 12 to 1:30 for those days too, but it's open for anyone else to provide feedback. And I guess if we do it like this, we don't need the doodle poll.
My other thing is I'll be traveling for the holiday. If we could do the 21st a little earlier, that would be good. But if not, I'll try to make that work as well.
This is Mike
Good
DiGiacomo.
earlier.
This is Mike DiGiacomo. So I'm out and not available next week. And I always say that. So if you wanted, I'd rather move the 3.4 discussion to a time that I'm here, one of your next 2 meetings. Allie will be here next week to be included in this discussion. I will be on vacation. So I'd like to move and make sure that I'm involved, because I think it's a bigger discussion, is the 3.4 discussion. I'd like to be involved in that, in like where we are and how we get there and what that involves, and work with you on that. So my only point is, if we can move your 3.4 discussion and make sure that's one of the other 2 meetings, that would be helpful.
And that's a great, thank you. And should we can we invite a guest since it's a bigger discussion?
Yeah, I
Like-
think we talked about that last meeting that we could.
Like the Workforce Investment Board, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So with that said, we have the 9th. I'm thinking we can talk about 3.2. The 16th, 3.3, and the 24th and 28th, potentially 3.4.
24th or 21st?
21st.
Okay.
24th is Thanksgiving. So
Right.
the week of
Okay.
Thanksgiving, yes. I was thinking that Monday, and then the 28th, the Monday after Thanksgiving, or that Tuesday, just trying to give as much time as possible for us to compile everything before.
Robin, what time works for you on the 21st, since you need to be heading out of town?
That was actually me that was heading out of town.
Oh, sorry, wrong person.
That's okay. I can do 10 if that could work for folks. If not, I'll try to make it work. I just might be in a car.
That's fine with me.
That's fine with me
I
as
have-
well.
I have class until 11:30 on Monday mornings. So if we could do 11:30 or later, that would be preferable.
I can make it work. 11:30.
Mike, is that okay for you? Because that's when we would be doing 3-4, I believe.
Yeah, that should be fine. We'll make that work.
And what about the 28th to finish out 3.4?
I'm good anytime that day.
And that's after the holiday. And so I don't know if we want to shoot for like noon or later for that day.
So then all of our meetings would be at 12 with the exception of the 21st. Is that correct? Okay.
So the 28th from noon to 1:30.
That works.
I've added these times into the rolling agenda and then we'll send out calendar invites today. The calendar invites today likely won't have the Zoom info, but we will update that as we get it created.
That sounds great. Thank you. And so again, 3.2 on the 9th, 3.3 the 16th, the 21st and the 28th, 3.4. And now that we have that situated, I think making sure we invite who needs to be invited, especially for 3.4. And so we'll follow up with that. And lastly, in our last 30 seconds, anything that you felt worked well for the meeting or anything you want us to change for future meetings?
I just wanted to add that I appreciate Dave taking notes while also contributing to the conversation, because I don't think I'd be able to take as good of notes as he is while also speaking. So kudos, Dave.
Edits are welcome and probably needed. And I'm grateful to Mike and Rachel and Graham for jumping on. It makes a big difference.
Happy to be here.
This was a great meeting. Thank you. Sorry again that I missed the other ones. Had a bit of a health challenge.
Should we just stay in touch over the next few days of like who we would want to invite? I'm thinking since our next meeting is coming up so quickly, I don't know if there's anyone we have on our radar for 3.2, but just kind of collaborate on anyone we're inviting to those meetings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just am so grateful for everyone. This is the best pillar. Everyone, I feel like we're working like peanut butter and jelly. I love it. And so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And yeah, great committee. And also thank you, Dave, especially for all of what you've done for the committee. And I also would not be able to take notes and facilitate. I'm not able to do that at all. So thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.